just for her to kind of go through some of the last set of priorities, some updates on that. We'll touch on the very few things that seem to have some legs for this extremely short legislative session. Talk about the budget process and how you all can kind of monitor some of the legislation and then get some feedback from the council about things you want us to think about moving forward, even though it's not a tremendously active time. Talk about that. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jennifer, and Diane has joined on us online. But I don't believe there is a public. No, not for this one. So we're using this to facilitate Diane's participation in our workshop here. We don't have any items for action necessarily today. So Jennifer, take it away.
So thank you all for being here tonight, and I wanted to just explain the document that you have in front of you. The 2021-2022 legislative priorities document is a document that you already had. This is just a reminder of where this started. And then the memorandum is what this presentation was based on. So you can use this as a reminder of what you've heard tonight, but you don't need to feel like you need to read it in advance because I will be going through everything that's in the document. So you can feel free to set that aside or follow along with it if you like. So as Scott said, the agenda for today's workshop will focus on the progress that was made toward the legislative priorities that the council adopted on February 23rd, 2021. So this includes legislative proposals, technical corrections that were adopted, language changes supported, and legislative funding priorities. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit about some future legislative considerations that are being watched. So before we move into the review of the 2021-2022 legislative priorities that you identified, I wanted to provide for your reference some resources to assist you in your work that are provided by the League of Wisconsin Municipalities and the Wisconsin State Legislative website. So for legal assistance, the League has 2 attorneys on staff to assist employees and officials of member municipalities. So they have Claire Silverman, who has been with the League since 1992, and Maria Davis, who joined the League in 2018. Both are available to serve as resources for inquiries, formal advisory opinions, legal resources, amicus briefs, and education. So you can find more information at lwm.info.org. And secondly, an effective legislative tracking resource that is provided by the state of Wisconsin is the Wisconsin Legislature Notification System. So with this system, users can go onto the website and get nightly personalized email notifications based on Wisconsin's legislative activity. You can follow that legislation by subject, proposal, committee, authors, and other topics. So this is found at notify.legis.wisconsin.gov. It is actually a really handy tool. I suggest that you stop it. You could use it as a game so that you can put in whatever is of interest to you, and every night you'll get input and updates about that if there has been any activity. It does make tracking bills much easier, and in my opinion, it will be a little bit more to use the website. So finally, this chart of the budget process in Wisconsin may be helpful to you. In Wisconsin, the state budget covers the 2-year period from July 1 of odd numbered year through June 30th of the next odd numbered year. In the fall of the even numbered year, state agencies submit budget requests to the Department of Administration. Therefore, new priorities will be proposed and adopted in September or October of 2022 for 2023 to 2024. The 105th Wisconsin State Legislature convened on January 12th, 2021 for the start of the 2023 legislative session and is scheduled to adjourn the legislative session in the spring of 2022. So advances were seen in all three areas of legislative priorities. The following legislative proposals were adopted as 2021-22 priorities by the council. Improvements to the emergency detention process, support of multimodal transportation long-term planning solutions, and COVID-19 relief assistance. Under improvements to the emergency detention process, the 2021-2023 budget invests $150 million into increasing access to care, strengthening mental health support, expanding telehealth accessibility, addressing substance use disorders and the opioid crisis, and badger care expansion. This money will provide support to regional crisis centers, regional crisis stabilization facilities, the Crisis Intervention Training Grant Program, staff increases, development of the Emergency Response Collaboration Grant, Milwaukee County Crisis Mobile Trauma Response Teams, and development of a behavioral health bed tracker.
I just skipped one up there.
In 2021, total GTA funding for cities, villages, and towns was $383,503,200. The 2021-2023 state budget increased that amount to $391,173,300 for 2022 and $398,996,800 for 2023, which represents a 2% increase each year of the biennium. The budget increased the per mile aid payment for towns by 2% each year from $2,628 to $2,681 in 2022 and $2,734 in 2023. All cities and most villages receive their GTA payments under the share of cost formula. Almost all towns are paid GTA on the rate per highway mile basis. The Department of Transportation is statutorily required to distribute GTA funds first to towns under the rate per mile component of the program. Then the remainder is distributed to cities and most villages on a share of cost basis. So in terms of COVID-19 relief assistance, the city of River Falls expects to receive approximately $1.6 million in ARPA funding from funds designated for local communities. ARPA funding has now been expanded to include capital projects if they're related to the public health emergency or economic impacts associated with the pandemic. The scope of projects have been expanded to relate to improvements to vacant and abandoned properties and rehabilitation or remediation of environmental contaminants and conversion to affordable housing. Funding uses for small business impacts include rehabilitation of commercial properties, startup or expansion costs, support for micro businesses, including financial, childcare, and transportation costs, have also been expanded. Additionally, new provisions allowed increased flexibility for government employment, including worker retention incentives, is included in the final ruling. In the areas of legislative technical corrections and state agency language changes, there were no notable changes or advances made. Significant advances have been made in the areas recognized by the council as funding priorities. Of the 4 priorities, 3 have experienced positive momentum, with West Central Biosolids facility improvements having failed to move forward due to the fact that Congress passed a continuing budget resolution instead of an actual 2022 budget. And that resulted in $1.6 million in potential federal funding being lost as a result. For the Kinney Corridor project, the city was awarded $350,000 for the feasibility study that has now been completed. As a result of Assembly Bill AB 905, the cost limitations for dam safety projects created in the 2021-2023 biennial budget would not apply to dam removal. So the prior total amount of financial assistance for a dam safety project is limited to no more than $1 million and also required that a matching grant be awarded. But today, actually, at about 10 a.m., AB 905 passed and was amended to include language that excludes dam removal from dam safety project limitations and no longer requires a matching grant. So this bill will move to the Senate for consideration in the coming weeks, and it will be named Senate Bill 839. It is likely to be tabled to allow for consideration of the amendments that were recently made to AB 905, but Senate Bill 839 is expected to go to the governor's desk to be signed. At that time, the council and the city administrator may be asked to send letters in support of AB 309, so there will be more to come on that. It isn't expected not to pass without those letters, but they're just a strong way of supporting that bill and making sure that it passes without any question. So to address the Powell Avenue Bridge project, the city submitted an application for Wisconsin DOT local bridge program funding in August 2021 for an 80% match of construction costs. The timeline for funding expected is that we can expect to receive approval notification from Wisconsin DOT by the end of February of this year, 2022. Plans and specs are then expected to be submitted to Wisconsin DOT in late 2022 or early 2023. And upon approval, the project could begin in late 2023 to 2024.
If the bridge stays up there.
Okay.
Everybody don't stick their chin in.
The state has granted $111 million in capital funds for the UWRF side tech building, which brings that project significantly closer to its funding goal of roughly $160 million. So that brings us to future priorities, and a couple of people have brought forth some things that they're interested in and watching. Areas of interest in future legislation could include a package of law enforcement bills introduced on January 4th. Of the bills in the package, AB 831, AB 832, AB 836, and Assembly Senate Bill 830, and Assembly Joint Resolution 110 are brought to your attention by Chief Young. These bills address officer retention, reimbursing law enforcement education, part-time academy programs, developing curriculum, teaching K-12 students about how to interact with law enforcement, and honoring law enforcement officers with Law Enforcement Appreciation Month. So the conditions that are informing support of these bills include that the state of Wisconsin is experiencing the lowest number of law enforcement officers in at least 10 years, with retirements, resignations, and diminished interest in the profession having contributed dramatically to the reduction in the police workforce. In the area of community and economic development, Senate Bill 518 has been sent to the governor's desk to be signed. This bill modifies the definition of environmental pollution under Environmental Remediation Tax Incremental Districts Law, which results in allowing communities to revitalize contaminated properties and spurring of development projects. Additional bills of interest to the city of River Falls community economic development include the bills you see listed that direct allocation of $10 million to attract new talent, create a tax credit program, and address the need to make residential building and housing more accessible and affordable. So that concludes your update for today. If there are any further resources that you would like as you think about these things, I'd be happy to provide those to you.
Jennifer, can you email out those links that we could sign up for the?
Absolutely.
Of the ones that you've got on here for future consideration,
Mhm.
after you're examining those, which ones do you think are most relevant to, likely, projects or needs of the city?
So as far as the law enforcement bill, so that package was much bigger than the ones that are listed here.
Okay,
And the ones indicated are the ones that Chief Young is in support of.
gotcha.
So I would say that if you look at that entire package, you can be assured that the ones that are here are the ones that should be focused on.
Gotcha.
Go ahead.
Oh, then on stuff on the back.
Yeah, and then the stuff on the back was provided to me by Amy Peterson. So again, so they're specific to what we're looking at here at the city.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Couple questions. I don't know if this really needs, the first comment I have, I don't know if it needs to be in legislative priorities. I think it's something we could probably pass an agreement, but over the period of 20 years, our state shared revenue dropped by 94 million. And if we increased it by, if we encouraged with along with other cities to increase it back to 2007 levels of 54 million, it would bring down property taxes for people. And I think a lot of people like that. So it's something for us to think about. Another thing we could actually think about adding now, and then it's up to the council to think about, but is modernizing the open meetings law so people can participate from home if they have a public comment or whatnot. And I think that would be something worth consideration.
Yeah, I'm interested in your open meeting. Refresh the first point that you made again, Tom.
Increasing shared revenue to 2007 levels of 54 million.
Okay. And so that would help reduce the disparity between Minnesota and Wisconsin property taxes, alleviate demands on cost for residents of the living particularly.
It bring down the cost of roads. Do you want a quick and easy example for your local community?
Okay, so assuming that spending stayed flat at the city, essentially we're shifting where the funding is coming from the state general fund instead of with the property tax.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Realizing that we're kind of building up for sometimes anticlimactic to talk about stuff now, going where it seems like the reach out there is the budget process and it's after elections and other stuff, but there are other topics that we assume the things that we're interested in, of interest to the council would be continue those interests. So we'd still like to get the biennial budget technical fix for us. Which again means getting some formal authority to recognize the 2-year budget process and a kind of a two-year levy. There wasn't any progress made on that and some of those other technical corrections that we talked about. But our primary focus in the short term, meaning from now until say September, October, is going to be focused on how to access federal resources through the, I guess, two bigger now they got new acronyms for them. I got to try to remember what they are. What's the infrastructure one called now? The
Bipartisan infrastructure
law? Yeah, the bill, the BIL. We're trying to get access to the bill. And then the other one is the Build Back Better or something, or Build Back America.
Build Back Better.
So, well, they came up with a new,
Well, yeah.
so there's a name now there's a name that they agreed on, that both parties can agree on for this stuff, so we have been inundated in the last 2 weeks with guides and handbooks and advertisements from consulting firms and direct emails from the legislators' offices, you know, wanting to make sure we can capitalize on the money that's coming out from the federal government. So including from state agencies who are sending us emails related to how they think the federal portion is gonna run through there. So there was a slide in our presentation on the, you know, kind of how these pies are. You know, there's a few programs we don't qualify. There's some nested ones for tribal nations that we wouldn't be eligible for. But the good thing for us as a local government is we can fit in the local pot, we can fit in the state pot, and we can fit in the federal pot. So we really have to figure out what's our best. So our staff has been having meetings. We had a meeting with West Central Regional Planning. We had a meeting with, I think Kevin had a meeting with, what's the lacrosse one called? The Mississippi Valley Regional Planning Commission about grants. So we're starting to try to figure out where we can access, for example, the federal government, non-locally or state allocated federal pot would be the U.S. Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration competitive grant program. So they've got a whole bunch of new money that they never had before in an existing program that we have already applied for in the past and been successful with the Innovation Center. So that's one area we could go after. Then the state has programs like transportation economic assistance or STP or state and local transportation projects, which is again another competitive project that we're eligible for. And then we are also finding, we think there are going to be some formulaic direct to city stuff from the feds. So there's kind of three piles looking at, or pies or pots or however you want to look at it, try to figure out the best way forward. So that will take up most of our time, but we don't want to lose track of what's going on in the state. But the best information we have about the state is that they're going to have another session in February, and maybe one and a session might be 1 day or 2 days. They're going to have another one in February. So they have today, and they'll have another one in February, and probably one in March, and that's it. And then it'll be done, and they'll have little opportunity to either help us or do damage to us over the summer. And then they haven't set their, you know, what the new schedule will be. So I think at least for the next 4 months, we'll probably have a short window of opportunity for anything now. And it doesn't look like the governor is that interested, nor is the legislature, in working together on anything. So they're probably just gonna let it ride. With the exception of like this dam thing, did take a bipartisan agreement because the governor would have to sign that. So I think they've agreed that there's few things that they agreed to in the budget that didn't turn out the way they thought it was gonna be. So they're gonna make those corrections. And they're also sitting in a very good revenue projection compared to what they thought they were gonna have. So that was just out today. The Wisconsin Policy Institute put out a report on that. So that the elections will matter because it'll make a difference in how they allocate what some people call surplus, some people just call over realized revenue. However, everybody's kind of positioning what this is, or overtaxed or whatever. So that'll be interesting for us to watch. So the 23-25 budget cycle, I wouldn't yet say it's going to be more exciting than other previous cycles, but it certainly has the opportunity to be. There's more opportunity for negotiations to occur because there's more money, which. You know, I've seen in Minnesota, allows the Democrats to get some programmatic things that they want. And then trade to the Republicans tax cuts in certain areas. And everybody feels like they still ended up getting more revenue that, into the system, which gives them more flexibility. So it's hard to imagine the legislature will screw that up. But it's certainly a possibility. So there's just a good. The wild card is inflation and some of these other things that we don't. Having a bunch more money is good if things cost about the same, but if they cost a lot more, then having a bunch more money doesn't necessarily get you progress to the extent people want to get progress. So remains to be seen. We also, there's some affordable housing stuff coming out. You should count me as a skeptic of some of this housing stuff because what I've seen is Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, Wisconsin Realtors Association pushing a lot of the legislation in the background, and so I'm a skeptic. Like, I would question if they're actually looking for affordable housing or if they're really looking for deregulation and prohibiting us from collecting impact fees and building permits. That's what I've seen in the past. It's not, their answer to affordable housing is charge the builders less, which, yes, from a practical standpoint, that you can draw a line between those things, but I haven't seen a broad coalition of people yet get together and talk about legislative changes that will do that. But we'll watch it because we've heard from a number of you that that's an issue that you want us to be aware of and try to make some progress on. But I honestly can't tell you that there's a whole lot of bills out there that look a lot promising. The league, including the league, has one that I'm kind of like, I don't know if it's that great or not. But they're talking about changing zoning practices and stuff that could help. Maybe, right, Amy? Maybe.
Yeah, they've got a webinar.
There's not much progress on making changes to WIDA or other people that have money for housing and actually the programs. There's more money in the programs, but they're not talking about changing eligibility or the way things work. And so then you tend to get the same old problem, right? It's the developers that know how to do tax credit subsidized housing. They do the same development. And so I haven't seen much on that. Have you seen? I haven't seen. There was some federal energy on that for a while. Who was Trump's HUD secretary? Was it Ben Carson? So he had made some inroads with some of the traditional kind of anti-cookie cutter tax credit stuff, and they had started to promote more flexibility, and I don't think that went anywhere. So we'll see what happens. I doubt it's going to start with HUD for innovation, but maybe. Diane, anything that you had for us that staff should keep an eye on?
Not top of mind right now. I agree that there's not likely to be a lot of movement in Madison this year.
Are the bills that Chief Young put forward, are those for consideration now, or is that like? Because it says January 4th, but is that likely to be acted on this session or?
I think it's likely to be acted on. I'm not sure if it has any. I don't know what the governor's plan is. And I don't even know if the Senate agrees with the House Republicans. I think it was, which bill, was it introduced to the House or Senate bill?
Assembly bill.
Assembly bill.
one joint drills and one private. That's how it's done.
And again, Chief Young didn't say everything in the package, I think we should wholeheartedly support. In fact, he turned down an invite to be a presser or whatever, because it didn't look like a bipartisan, public safety improvement bill to him. Although there's things in there that obviously, for example, that Assembly Bill 830 is not without controversy. So the question is, would the city really get behind that? It could have some impact, positive impact in recruiting, and so you can make a connection to the local government, but probably it's not our bread and butter. Our bread and butter would probably be AB 832, which would help academy cost reimbursement. AB 836, which would probably would potentially impact one of the technical colleges in our area, which could, and then, law enforcement appreciation month would be a reasonable thing. I think it's not so even these, I don't know what gets through, what doesn't get through. I don't think we're talking about having the council pass a resolution picking which ones and us sending an official letter. I think Chief Young's had reasonable good judgment so far, saying, it's not adopted by the council, but here are some things that would be helpful if we can do it. If you have objection, that would be good to bring it up now, I guess, for these. You've heard what I have to say about the package.
I have an objection to AB 831 and AB 830.
Okay.
I just think it will be extremely political and not a helpful way. To endorse those, but I agree with Scott's sentiments that 832, 836, and the joint resolution are all helpful. So, in the recruitment and retention.
I agree with Alyssa.
And to be clear, retention and recruitment was what Chief Young was primarily focused on.
Great, that's great. I just, the one for AB 831, I was okay with it until I read the last sentence, or the last, so what this would do is go to communities where there have been concerns with, for example, Minneapolis right now, we would be spending money to go to Minneapolis and do a marketing campaign in Minneapolis to recruit their police officers to come here. Is what that reads like to me.
Yeah, I think so. I think I understand your point. I don't know the author's intent, but I can tell you from that's language is modeled after what I've seen for the one campaign they did in Chicago related to, there was a specific, there was a tax change to some kind of worker, and WEDC did a program to go to Chicago and put ads on subways and whatever to try to attract those. So they essentially went to an area they thought was ripe to pull people. So I think that's exactly what they're talking about as one aspect of this, is to say, hey, if you don't think you're working in an area where law enforcement is supported, we want to show you that in Wisconsin it's a good place to work. But I'm not naive to the other aspects that's involved with that. But I also will tell you the city of River Falls is willing to strongly consider that type of strategy for our police. How was that? Now, we haven't placed ads in the Minneapolis paper. We're not sending things to the hangouts of police officers in Minneapolis and St. Paul, but certainly that is a strategy we've talked about. if there's a perception that those communities are not as good places for officers to work, would we welcome them with open arms? We're not above going to find the best people we can for our government spots. I don't know if that makes sense.
You think that would be Minneapolis?
I think, well, I don't want to say we. I think there's an opportunity to find good people all over the place. I wouldn't write somebody off because of the employer they work for. I think we would use our process to find out if we felt they were good.
No different than any other recruiting we do the same thing for any other job.
Yeah, and I don't think we've talked, I don't know whether we've talked about it. I characterize what our organizational approach is, so I'll just talk for myself. I would, in the court, if we're not talking about, so let's talk about non-law enforcement recruiting. We would have a reasonable level of suspicion about an employee who was coming from a local government we thought was not good at what they do. But we wouldn't exclude that person from going through our process and trying to discover if they were an exception to the general rule. So that makes sense. So yeah, I think being honest, we would look at Minneapolis and St. Paul as an opportunity. But I'm not sure it's as big as opportunities everybody thought originally. You know, I think for a number of reasons. Wages, pensions,
I don't have.
all kinds of things.
Like Dan said, I don't have a problem with the recruitment aspect. If you guys put stuff in the Star Tribune or on Indeed or any of those sites, like, I mean, that makes sense when you're recruiting, when we're in a metro area. You know, so I think that makes sense. What I have concerns about is that we would go specifically to places where there have been community concerns about policing. And that's, I mean, I'm totally fine with it until that part, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I understand your point.
Yeah.
I guess I don't want to speak for the way it's worded because I don't know if we took it directly from the bill, if Jennifer and I summarized it. So I guess I want to be cautious about saying out of the whole bill language, if that's in a nutshell what they're doing.
Right. Like, I'm totally fine if you went to Minneapolis and St. Paul and said, hey, we'd love to have you, versus, hey, we want you to come here because your community is being mean to you. That feels like a different.
Yes, and I don't know how we control the tone of the WEDC and DRJ and all that. So that's a good question.
Yeah.
And that is it's a real thing too, and we'll, again, more generalized out of government recruiting. Wisconsin in particular has been, at least a few Wisconsin communities have been keen to the idea of looking at Michigan and Illinois for local government employees. You know, Illinois' public pension is either disaster or near disaster. And so there's been opportunities for the last 10 years to say to a city planner in a suburb of Chicago, hey, do you want to come up? You know, and so there is part of it. You are in fact saying, that's kind of a not that great place. Do you want to come work for us instead? But we have to be tactful about that because we also don't typically hire candidates to spend their whole interview telling us how bad their current employer is either. So there's an aspect of us as a recruiter that's probably there's some irony in the fact that some of the things we might do as a recruiter, we would be cautious about if a candidate is the same, but I get your point specifically for police, given the environment we're in. And specifically that some of the social unrest, defund police and other things have been right in our backyard. So it's a different thing than we're recruiting somewhere else. Does that make sense?
It does.
And I understand the sensitivity to it. That's when I looked at the bills, though, I had some, I don't think that makes it through anyways, the governor's desk, but.
I would also be interested in learning more about Assembly Bill 830. Exactly who's going to require what in this model curriculum, and what's the school board think about it?
And my advice may be more that it's not in our wheelhouse, so we should.
Right.
Unless we think we're getting a huge return on police recruiting for the city of River Falls, we probably wouldn't get too involved in that. But again, there is this somewhat false choice sometimes that we're told we either love our employees or we don't, based on what we do and don't support and what we do and don't include in our, so I'm not trying to straddle the fence. I'm just trying to understand the realities of what messages, what sends to whom and how that works, given the fact that I employ, 27 police officers. But I appreciate you bringing it up. It's good that you're willing to talk, that we can talk about it too, and just say, well, we're not going to talk about it because it makes people uncomfortable either. Either our employees or others. Been down that road lately or recently. But what I'm hearing universally is the council wants to help support our recruitment and retention efforts for law enforcement, which is a good message for us to send to our employees and to people who might want to be future employees. We just may not like letting the state be the one who crafts, which determines what we think. Other topics that have been on people's minds.
Can you refresh my memory on what the state, I know Jennifer went through it, what did we actually gain with regard to the mental health detention, emergency detention staff? Did we get beds locally? Are we still driving people to Oshkosh or wherever it is? What did we get there?
Yeah, so I'm not prepared to answer it as specifically as I'd like to. The police chief isn't here, but so I'll follow up with you all on that.
Okay.
Let me generalize with
Yeah, that's fine.
because
I think there's.
I'd like unanimous consent to revise my comments at a later date or whatever. But we believe that the bed count is going to increase in Eau Claire. There's also some efforts to figure out an intra
Would be across the.
intra agreement so that we can figure out this bed tracker, not just in Wisconsin, but in Minnesota. The bed tracker itself is a good tool because it helps law enforcement and other people and families, for first the families that are having crisis figure out what's going on, but then also there's been a new, I believe the last update I have from the chief is there's a new arrangement that kind of came out of this as far as transportation agency that's available, which uses either off-duty or retired law enforcement officers to do the transports for cities. So that's something we're very interested in because obviously our chief cares a lot about the person and they don't want to just release custody to any old taxi cab driver to take him to Oshkosh, but that's a newer thing that's kind of come out of this mental health is can we give, if one of the big burdens is we're taking law enforcement and ambulance folks and everybody out of the situation, can we help the police department and Alina figure out a way? We're also fortunate still because we basically have the Minnesota healthcare system here, but sometimes they can work their magic to get people in. And then there was something else that I can't put my finger on exactly what it had to do with veterans, the veterans beds at the VA hospital. Just because it's in Minnesota doesn't mean we can't use it. And the states were trying to work on that too, so that they're kind of in the mix of beds to be used. So we've made progress. but the promises have not all been, that we're far from implementing what was in the bill, right? This is still working through task force committees. I think the bill set an RFP for the beds. And so the hospitals are kind of responding to this is how many beds we can provide. So I don't think there was any immediate, you got something from the chief?
Well, I thought I remembered this and I wanted to look it up. Some of that funding, 15 million of that does go to adding 22 new mental health treatment beds to Sacred Heart and St. Joseph Hospitals in Eau Claire and Chippewa Falls. The funding wasn't released for that until just this past October. So they haven't even been able to plan or design until it was released.
So like $700,000 a bed, did I do my math right there?
It goes to the psychiatrist for a certain amount of time.
Okay.
It's remarkably expensive.
Yeah, I don't think it was a capital grant. It was basically a grant for the services provided. And yes, it was extremely, I think that's, I shouldn't characterize it that way. It seemed like a lot of money to incentivize them.
Particularly for something that we're going to be getting billed back to the city and or private insurance companies.
Yeah, the city itself wouldn't be involved in that. It would be the either Badger Care, Medicare, or private pay. I believe. I don't think we pay. Josh, you don't know offhand. Being new, I don't believe we pay for any of it. And in fact, that's why we were taking it in Oshkosh, because the state, it's a mandated service the state has to provide. But the closest mandated bed we could find is Oshkosh, so you're driving them all the way and saying, you know, here they are. Because you can't take them to River Falls Hospital because they don't have the mental health bed or whatever.
So in general, I think what I'm hearing is there's a lot more work to go on here. We should keep it on our priority list near the top.
Yeah, I think that we're fine doing that, because I don't think we would fly the mission accomplished banner yet.
No.
So it's the.
I'm glad somebody laughed.
Although I did like the reference. So I'm new, so I still don't totally understand this. If somebody is having a mental health crisis and the police are called, the police go, the police officer has to make the call that it's a mental health crisis, or do they take them to the hospital first, or like?
No, in Wisconsin, you have to use police powers, so it's only the police officer, a law enforcement officer that can make the determination.
Okay, so then.
And that's it's a temporary
Okay,
custody, basically, is a specific part of the law that says
Right.
you can do it without a court order, right? A long-term one involves a lot more stuff, but essentially you're using a police power to take somebody's freedom away
sure.
for, because in Minnesota, it's a healthcare provider. And Minnesota gives the power to doctors to do that. So there can be really good debate about whether that's a good idea or not. Talk to Minnesota people, they say that's great. Because it's all on the doctors, so they go to, please take them to the ER. And then the doctor says, yep, this is a commitment or not. I believe that's how I understand the difference between Wisconsin, but in Wisconsin, only one enforcement officer can do that.
Oh.
So the ER doctor advises, you know, but it's a big burden on the law enforcement officer in Wisconsin that make that determination, and they do it with supervisors involved and stuff like that. And usually it's with a family member begging them to do it, right? This is not, usually it's not.
And this is only for those that are resistant or incapable of making the decision themselves. So somebody that
Right.
wants to seek help, you don't have to get emergency detention for it. And in fact, somebody that is voluntarily seeking help is a family member can drive them across state lines and take them over to United.
Sure.
That's been kind of the hypocrisies of this whole issue. Having dealt with this when we had to use an ambulance to take somebody to Oshkosh, and if a family member can drive somebody right across the border and take them to any facility, it's
Yeah,
just an emergency detention.
That's shocking that kind of like determination. I mean, obviously they would work in concert, but that's because the other thing too is then that person doesn't get emergency services, health services for, I mean, Oshkosh is what, 3.5, 4 hours away?
Well,
They have to be medically cleared.
Yeah, they have to-
Typically, they have to be medically cleared.
They're at the hospital until the hospital believes they're safe to transport.
Oh, so they.
The receiving facility, Winnebago will not take them until they have a physician that's medically cleared them.
Yeah, we have,
Oh, good,
we're taking
okay.
them to the hospital.
Oh, okay. That's what that was my concern, because I'm like, sometimes mental health crisis can be brought on by medical conditions that aren't being
And we
treated.
should say, we're not always taking them to the hospital. Often, I don't know if often's the right,
Your
percentage. the hospital is calling
Yeah,
us
yeah.
and saying, you need to come to the hospital, because again, they can't,
Sure.
you know, you need to go to the hospital, this person's about to leave, this person's talking about killing themselves, or we need you to come, and then they try to stabilize, and then they're taken away. But no, I mean, it's a tremendous burden on law enforcement officer to have to make that determination.
And for the longest time, there's a contracted transportation provider by Winnebago, out by Oshkosh, I guess. That had just such scarce availability, it sometimes resulted in our own officers or we even had an ambulance. You know, driving them 4 hours out, coming 4 hours back, so it's anything closer is a relief.
Yeah, the state had contracted with a provider, which we were supposed to first try to rely on. They were supposed to try to arrange service and be the intermediary. Again, I don't know enough. I used to, but I don't know enough about the details to just rattle them off, but it's a significant concern. It doesn't really show up in the budgetary for us necessarily, because we're either using an officer that's already on duty. They may incur some overtime, but it's not easy to see where we use reserve officers quite a bit too. We're fortunate to have that resource. It's it's a long time to put somebody who's suffering a mental health crisis, essentially locking them in a cage and driving them across the state is not I think the most ideal way to treat people. Till now, we haven't really had a lot of options, except for the workarounds that police officers have found to try to help families in crisis. Like,
Well, they're.
is there any way you can take them over to Fairview or wherever?
I know Claire's an example of counties working together, but you can't always get that in every kind of situation.
Yeah, and you can't really, it's not efficient to staff one mental health bed, right? I mean, you have to have a system of support to do that. So that's why I believe the compromise, so to speak, is this Chippewa Claire thing. I think eventually more places will be added to the list in order to deal with the reactive nature of our treatment of this problem.
Transportation stuff, when we're doing health, if there's no law on that. So transportation, we've got our bike and ped plan. And there's a potential here, and we currently are having issues with our shared ride service as far as availability. Are there any solutions you see at a legislative level that we should be seeking? Or is that something that we are going to have to solve? Finding, expanding sources for transportation outside of the 80% shared.
Yeah, I mean, I think some legislative options that I can think of off the top of my head would be mandating it's a state supplied service. I mean, essentially saying it's not a city service. if it was a state service, then the county would be the provider of the service. I think there's zero chance that we can convince the state to make the counties take this over. I think there already is, it's not impossible to do transportation authorities in Wisconsin, so we already have some ability to do either through an interlocal agreement or under the there's a statute that allows cooperation, kind of like WPPI is for our electric. I mean, I think there's tools already that if we really wanted to all get together as a region and figure it out, we could do it. I don't think it's as easy as other states, so there's probably some legislation that could help.
We don't have a Met Council for Western Wisconsin.
Yeah, or a regional, or a really clear, easy regional transportation authority statute that says Pierce, Polk, and St. Croix can get together. Here's how the funding formula works. There's 2 board members from this county and a lot of other states have a more, set up where you just have votes at the county and you do it. I think Wisconsin's a little bit harder to get going, but like Dunn County has essentially a transportation authority. Funding, we could ask the state for more money, because I think the reality is we're already subsidizing the service significantly, and that's still not paying that much for the drivers, which means it's hard for them to find drivers, which means the vans aren't at 100% utilization ratio.
So I mean, there's a $19 an hour gap in between what we're paying them and what they're paying. $19 an hour gives a lot of room for raises on $10.
Right, well, but they do have to pay gas and other stuff out of the differences, right? I mean, what we pay per hour is for them to operate the service. Run the vehicles and that. But I wouldn't argue that there might be a room there. They certainly would say there isn't, because they've been the sole bidder, and that's nobody else has come in and said, oh, I can do it for that amount and pay drivers more. So that's the question that's out there. Anything else legislative? Jason, you and I haven't talked too much about the taxi stuff.
I guess I would just add, we do currently have an analyst of ours conducting a taxi rate study and feasibility review of the shared ride taxi and perhaps some comparables. And we've talked about, it's kind of stay tuned, but a lot of the federal stimulus programs do have some transit related funding. We hope to be able to continue to keep our eye on and find a way to seize. Not sure. I'm certainly not familiar with the ins and outs of what that may be.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's any legislative fixes we need to pull back the market so that there's all this activity and there'd be all these private transportation providers. I don't see legislatively anything on that side. I'm not sure automated vehicles are allowed in Wisconsin yet. I mean, so at some point there might be legislation that if a couple of these pilot projects work out in Las Vegas and wherever else they've got,
Madison, I believe, is going.
you could, I could see us having an automated vehicle running up and down from north to south Main Street. That isn't that hard to imagine at all, actually. But I don't know right now if you can do that in Wisconsin. I don't know if it's legal. I think it's legal to have a car pick people up at the 1300 and take them up to,
Even all these, the dispatch question, I mean, we're essentially using a system here that looks like a 1960s snapshot of Danny DeVito sitting in the cage with an overflowing ashtray, pot still coffee, and a push button mic. It's not 1960. Little map on the wall,
Yeah, so legislation where the state would have buy a statewide dispatching system and give it away to cities and their operators for free. Again, I don't know how you generate, tax is a whole other thing, but we could have a whole workshop on that. But legislatively, I'm not sure if that's the question, which I think it is, I'm not sure right now. More money, more reimbursement would probably be at least a short-term fix, because if you've been paying the drivers more, you can probably get them better. But that's not a sure thing either, given the market right now. Because you can operate, there's no legislative prohibition on Uber, Lyft, other things, so people can do ride services in town.
Awfully hard to compete with a buck a ride. And I say this as somebody that was making pretty good money driving Uber. I can't compete with the buck a ride.
Yeah,
And the residents can't afford Uber rates for the most part for the things that they need. We have a gap here where the free market cannot deliver a product that is needed by the residents. So we do have, for the support of the business community, for the support of the residents, we do have to find something to provide that service. And some of it's being done. Look at the design plan and the long-term stuff that's being done in the city. You are designing a city that is going to be functional for more people without the need to drive downtown. Right. That's going to help our downtown. We're going to have businesses that aren't going to be constrained by parking. But you've been putting the work in on this. It's not an overnight.
no, and transportation is a different problem on February 8th than it is on June 8th.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
walkability and bikeability of this town is really good, and so we don't have a lot of complaints in the summer for taxis, because they're not gonna wait for it, they just grab their 2 bags from Family Fresh and walked home. So that's the fun of this. We could probably try to get tram or something, man. Monorail. There will be a city that does that out of this transportation, I suspect. Somebody is gonna take some weird new technology and get the feds to give them $10 million to do it. I don't think it's gonna be us. Well, I appreciate the time. Again, I understand it's a little anticlimactic. We wanted to just kind of keep it on the schedule, get the discussion. We talked through a few things, and we'll keep working hard to see where we get a seat at the table. And then I'd encourage all of you to, as your passion leads you there, to keep track of what's going on. Feel free to email forward stuff to us. One of Jennifer's roles in the job description is kind of track that, be a liaison. So to the extent that you're interested in something and you want us to be interested in it, send it along to us and we'll figure it out. Thanks.
Thank you.
And Diane, I think we're gonna reconnect closer to 6:30.
Right, yep, I've got a separate invitation for that. I'll see you then.
Dinner time.